Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Norwich Castle. We're going to make a start. My name's Rosie Gray, and I'm based here at the castle as one of the art team, and I've had the great privilege of working with Daniel and Clara over the last couple of years, developing The Lost Estate, which is a new series of work. And I know today Daniel and Clara will be thinking about their practice much more broadly, so giving a real context for their work, thinking about its history, but also the future as well. So I'm really excited to hear them speak. Just one word of housekeeping, we are going to record the talk today. If anyone is not happy with that, please do come and speak to me and we'll make sure that you're not in the final edit, but the camera is very much on Daniel and Clara. We're also recording audio, so there'll be a chance for questions afterwards. And I think you're going to speak for around 45 minutes to 50 minutes. Thank you. So I'm just going to start the recording. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming along this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Rosie, for having us here today to kind of giving us a chance to share some of the creative process and some of the things that we were thinking about while we were making The Lost Estate. So we're Daniel and Clara. We've been working together for 13 years, and we see ourselves as two halves of a single artist. We work across moving image, photography, performance, and mail art. And the camera is our primary tool. We work with both digital and analog and stills and moving images. And we are interested in investigating the role that the photographic image plays in how we create meaning and how we make sense of the world around us. And we're really interested in the strangeness and beauty and mystery of being living, breathing human creatures with all of our imagination, our complex thoughts and feelings and sensory experiences, and how all of these layers are continuously informing our sense of reality and our moment-to-moment experience. And how throughout all of our lives hangs this knowledge that we will die one day, and this puts a question onto us, which is how do we live meaningfully with this time that we have between now and the end. And our work is, I feel like right at the center, is our way of exploring this. So in the last few years, we've been particularly focused on thinking about the relationship between humans and the natural worlds, and The Lost Estate very much grows from this. And today we're going to be talking through the making of it, and hopefully taking you on a journey through some of the ideas behind the process, some of our research that we did here at the castle with the collection, and giving you an insight into the work. But before we speak about The Lost Estate, we'll go back to a previous project, which is in some ways where this started.
So in spring 2020, we were between houses. We'd been living in London before this moment, and we were staying with family on Mersey Island when the first kind of news came through about this pandemic that was slowly kind of making its way across the planet. And, like probably many of us at first, we kind of just dismissed this news as being more kind of sensationalist, kind of clickbait and people sort of overreacting. But then, of course, it very quickly dawned on us that this was a serious situation that we were a part of. And then when the first lockdown was announced, we realized that our short stay on Mersey Island, of which we expected would be a couple of weeks while we looked for a new place to live, would be actually an extended stay. So we kind of happily, in some ways, found ourselves living through this strange moment on this beautiful island. Mersey Island sits near Colchester on the Essex coast. And, you know, this was a time when it was an incredible weather. I'm sure you can all remember the sort of strangeness of the situation, but we had that sort of amazing spring. And we were in this place, and each day we were using our permitted 1 hour of walk to explore our new surroundings. So each day we would kind of set out and walk down the avenue to the beach, walk along the beach, and then along this tree-lined lane and sort of circle round back to the house. And each day we would do this same walk. And one of the things that really struck us was, now that there was no people around, no cars in the street and no planes in the sky, we'd become acutely aware of the sound of the birds singing in the trees. And we felt like we were hearing them in a way that we'd never heard them before. And as well as that, we were kind of, because we were doing this repetitive walk of the same area, we suddenly realized that we were seeing the hedgerows change day by day in a way that we hadn't witnessed before. And it was like this great gift of kind of deep looking and awareness of the shifts that were happening in nature day by day that we hadn't really witnessed before or hadn't been aware of before. So we started making these short videos, these 1 minute, 1 or 2 minute films of us sitting, standing, or laying in the landscapes that we were walking in every single day. And in a way, we did these as a way to respond to our new living situations, our new environment, but also as a way of responding to the wider situation that we were living through. It was our way of dealing with the anxiety of the pandemic and this kind of complex situation that was going on in the world. And one of the things we wanted the work to be was very simple. We didn't feel like what this situation required was a complicated response. So we stripped our filmmaking down to the barest elements. These were all shot on an iPhone that was on a tripod, simple, uncut moments that were around a minute long. And we were thinking about those origins of cinema, those early films by the Lumiere brothers of just, you know, workers leaving a factory or people sort of walking in a garden. And we were very much just thinking about getting back to basics. So we were making these short films. There's 100 films made over 1 year, starting in that first lockdown. And they move through the seasons. And they're these simple moments of us in the landscape through these kind of this pandemic period. And as we were making them, we were releasing them online one at a time. And in some ways, you know, at a certain point, we decided we were going to make 100 and that we were going to do it for a year, because we were thinking a lot about calendars and time and the experience of time. And I guess we were also thinking about the history of landscape painting. We're particularly interested in those interwar years artists, people like Ravelius, Paul Nash, John Nash, Graham Sutherland, all those kind of amazing artists who were dealing to their local environment and to the local landscape in a very personal and intimate way. So all of this was kind of on our minds when we were making this work, but we didn't really know what the sort of final outcome could be. But then at a certain point, we realized that we wanted to kind of exhibit these as a kind of full series, and that when they were complete, we wanted to show them as a sort of installation. And we submitted them to an open call here at the castle for a group show, and they were included, and this was their first exhibition. And it became a part of a tour of the work that we did across East Anglia, taking this project and other works that we'd been making on show around the region at various galleries. So we have a clip of this project. It's a 5-minute clip just to give you an experience of what the project's like. And I think the clip starts at where the beginning was.
Yeah,
and
it starts with
yeah, so it's the first five minutes worth. I think the total runs to about an hour and a half for the full series. So after exhibiting this here, Rosie initiated a conversation with us about the possibility of working together on a project. And she drew our attention to the Norwich School of Painters and suggested that there was potential links between the things that we were exploring and our interests and what they were doing.
So when Rosie introduced us to the castle's collection, and we came to the castle and had a look through the paintings, and we had conversations with a couple of the curators who told us some of the history. We particularly focused in on looking at John Crome, who was an artist that we weren't familiar with before. But the castle, as many of you will know, has a significant collection of his work. And he was one of the founders of the Norwich School of Artists and a teacher to many of its members. And we found him an interesting and an influential character. And so he lived in Norwich and ventured very rarely outside of the region. And his work has a strong focus on the landscapes that surround Norwich, all places that he would have known well and had a lifelong engagement with. And this was something that we felt was, like Rosie mentioned, a resonance with our work and this interest in place and looking at place with a sort of sustained interest over time. And we were also particularly struck by the attention that Crome gave to overlooked and seemingly insignificant aspects of the landscape, and how he found interest and beauty in weeds and common plant species or pieces of flint and empty corners of the countryside, subjects that in a way at the time might not have seemed worthy of painting, but by giving them his attention, he also gave them value. So Crome was part of a generation that was defined by the Industrial Revolution and the enclosure movement. And landscape painting, this in the early 19th century, was increasing in popularity and was shifting from being simply a setting for classical narratives to becoming focused on depiction of contemporary uses of the land and ideas about nature. And this is reflected in his work. Crome, in a way, was responding to the changes that were taking place in the landscapes that he loved, places that he was firmly rooted in. Similar to Constable and the poet Daniel Clara, in some ways, in the way that in their work, they were trying maybe to hold on to the landscapes that existed before these changes were taking place. So our relationship to the natural world has changed a lot in the last 200 years, in the past 200 years since then. But what we're experiencing now is a result of things that were set in motion then. And we're interested in how our relationship with the natural world can be chronicled in depictions of nature throughout the history of art. And this was very much on our minds when we were looking at Crome, thinking about how his images speak of his time, of the increase of industrialization, and how this relates to the time that we're living in now, when we're all becoming increasingly aware of the climate crisis and the destructive impact that we're having on the planet.
So for this project, we wanted to continue exploring this theme of figures in a landscape and thinking about our relationships to our environments and nature, which had started with On the Island, but to create a series of larger photographs conceived as being moments from an imagined narrative taking place in the gardens of a country estate. And we were incredibly lucky to find a residency in Norfolk at a place called High House in Westacre, which is a large country estate where we spent a month last summer living and working on this project. And we knew as soon as we were invited to do this project that we wanted to create this work in Norfolk, that because of being able to show it at the museum and because we were responding very much to these Norfolk artists, it felt appropriate that we should immerse ourselves in the Norfolk landscape and somehow try to speak directly to the place. And our work is always place responsive, even when we're not making such direct works in response to place. It always feels to us like the environment that we're working in or the weather is somehow seeping in and influencing what our pictures become. And we like to, over time, we've realized this, and we've liked to sort of encourage this, to find ways to somehow open ourselves up to this experience and really let it become almost like a third collaborator in our practice. When we make a project, we always go in with a plan. We always have certain parameters that we're working with, but then there's this kind of moment when those plans meet up against the reality of the situation, the environment, the weather, how we feel, what we experience there. So there's this kind of dance between the intention and then the reality of being in that place. So this is a couple of shots of the place where we had a wonderful month last summer. So the exhibition includes 6 pictures, and we actually created 12 in the full series. And we're going to show you all 12 of the pictures today, but we're going to focus specifically on the 6 that are in the exhibition and unpack those a little bit. They all have their own titles. This one is called Everything They Wanted. And as you can see, we've placed the human figures in the background and have given significant attention to the foreground. And we're combining really a close-up and a wide shot in a single frame. You could also say that it's a still life and a landscape within a single picture. And this is an effect that would be quite easy to achieve if we were making a painting, but actually is quite difficult to achieve in a photograph. And in order to do this, we used a special lens, which is called a split diopter lens, which essentially enables 2 different planes of focus within a single image. It kind of looks like this. So it's basically a half of a lens that sits on the front of the main lens. So that magnifies whatever is close in the foreground. So everything you're seeing in this series has been created with this lens, and there's no post-production effects. There's no layering of images. It's all created in camera. So what you see is what the camera saw when we were on location making these pictures. These lenses are quite often used in cinema, but we haven't really found any other examples of photographers using them. They're quite popular in the 1970s in horror films and crime films. I don't know if you've ever seen any films by Brian De Palma. There'll often be sort of these very extreme uses of something very close to the camera and then, someone in the background. And they're often used and you wouldn't know it because they're used quite subtly, but we really like to see when they're used in these more extreme ways where you get that kind of fracturing of the image when the foreground and background are kind of somehow dislocated in some ways, and it kind of foregrounds the effect.
This picture is called A Last Look Around. So all the pictures in the series were taken at sunrise and sunset. We wanted to capture this very particular light that we feel it's a transitional moment between night and day, between consciousness and dream, and create this feeling of being in between time. So often this time twilight's called magic hour, and so the picture's kind of existing in this world that is dreamlike, but also sometimes has this eerie atmosphere. And because we decided to shoot at these particular times of day, this established a routine for how we worked during the residency. So our routine was that we would wake up at 5 a.m. each day, and we'd head out into the grounds and set up. And we'd have a window of about 20 to 30 minutes as the sun came up to capture a picture. After this, we would usually spend the mornings helping out around the grounds. And then in the afternoons, we'd look back at what we'd done and discuss it and plan the next pictures. And then as evening approached, we'd head out to shoot another picture at sunset and work until the light was gone, and then come back and prepare for the next day. So we did this every day for the month, and it was quite an intense experience, as it often is when we make a project. And there's always a certain tension about working with the landscapes, as we're always in a dance with the shifting light and the weather conditions. And some pictures took several attempts to get. This one took three attempts, 3 mornings to get right. And in a way, as Daniel said, we always go into a project with a plan and a structure in mind, and some things that start forming even sometimes without us meaning to. So the residency was during the month of August, so we had been picturing maybe this warm and sunny weather, but actually it turned out to be a very damp, and it rained quite a lot during that month. And in a way, this completely influenced what the pictures become and infused the series with a melancholy mood.
So, equal to our inspiration that we take from painting, we draw a lot on the history of cinema. And there's quite a large number of films that are kind of constant companions that influence our work time and time again. And one filmmaker that we always return to is Marguerite Duras. This is a still from her film India Song, which is an absolute masterpiece of cinema. All of her films are incredible, and they really stand alone. There's nothing else quite like them in the history of cinema. She's very much carved out her own space. If you haven't seen her work, I highly recommend trying to track down India Song. Is a really good place to start. And she often kind of disconnects the image from the soundtrack in some way. And you'll see figures wandering around in these spaces, in rooms, in landscapes. And over on the soundtrack, you'll hear music, but you'll also hear voices speaking. And they can be voices that sometimes appear to be the characters talking, but they can also be people almost like commenting on what's going on screen. And they're often about these characters who are sort of experiencing displacement and loss in some ways, usually upper class characters that are sort of sadly clinging on to a world that has gone, a world that no longer exists, and kind of wandering around in this strange melancholy dream state. And I think even just from this still, there's probably obvious sort of how that kind of relates to the pictures that we've made. But we also really love sci-fi and horror films, and we're big fans of sci-fi literature as well. John Wyndham's sort of eerie tales of strange going-ons in English villages. The adaptation, Day of the Triffids, from his book is one of our favorites, about this shift in agency from humans to plants. The plants start attacking the humans. Has been just one of those stories that we just keep returning to again and again. And we also really love hand-painted lobby cards like this one, which I think has been a kind of constant obsession for us. And I think this is also probably quite clear how this influences our work, these kind of moments of loaded with action and emotion, but as a still frame.
This picture is called A Sudden Downpour. And you might not be able to see it on the screen, but if you look closely at the picture, there are drops of rain on the leaves, and it was pouring down as we made this. And we had to protect the camera with and the lights with a large umbrella. And this picture was taken in the walled vegetable garden of the estate. And we wanted to use all parts of the estate and explore how they could spring forth different moments and different moods and narrative scenes. And we had been thinking a lot about the idea of the garden as a psychological space. And for this, I mean, not just a physical space, but the garden as it kind of exists to reveal an inner life, how gardens are human constructions and rearrangements of reality that externalize an inner need. And I think gardens always express something about our relationship to nature. we always think of gardens as dreams made real. There are these spaces that we create to be in nature, to be in a closer relationship to the natural world. But at the same time, it's a space where nature is tamed and it's shaped to human ideas of harmony and beauty. And so gardens are always spaces where some form of control is exercised, and the power dynamic between us and the natural world is continuously negotiated. And of course, all gardens are on some levels a desire to create paradise. And this is an expression of a psychological center that is deeply connected to ideas of home, of belonging, and being in tune with one's environment. This is how the camera was protected while we were making that. And this picture is called This Side of the Wall. So growing from this interest in gardens, really, a reoccurring motif in our work is the story of Adam and Eve. We've worked with this story in a number of ways across films and photographs, and we use it to think about the relationship between humans and their environments and experiences of crisis and the split between humans and nature. And we're interested in this because it's an origin story. It's a foundational myth of our culture. It's certainly in our Western culture, it's a story that is deeply embedded in everything. It's shaped customs and the way that ideas and values have evolved. So it's our cultural heritage, even if we're not Christians, or even if we think of religion in the way that society is now. But we are still living in a world that has been shaped by this story. And it's a story that very much speaks about how humans relate to nature, which is why we find it so interesting to think about at this particular point in time. It speaks of our disconnection and the split, the rupture between humans and nature. And also speaks of the crisis that comes from self-awareness and the coming to consciousness of the impact of our actions. So the pictures that we've created, they're not really supposed to be directly read as these are the characters of Adam and Eve. We see it more like a motif that resonates across our work and across these pictures, specifically in various ways, in this visual splitting of the image, the psychological splitting in us humans, and also the series of emotional states, sometimes shock, sometimes depression, sorrow, anxiety, and overwhelm. So these two humans are entangled in their emotional traumas, wandering the gardens and grounds of the country estate. And the garden is vividly alive, and they appear to be receding in the background in uneasy and uncertain relationships with their environment. So this is not the biblical narrative. This is Adam and Eve at the end of the world, confronting the realization of what we have done to the world. So there's, within these characters, there is a search for belonging, a need for a place that we can call home. And I think this is personally within us as well, in a way that in which maybe, yeah, in a more personal way, we can relate to this story. And this runs through all of our work, but here it kind of comes out in this more mythic way, speaking to the wider issues of where we are as a species, thinking about what is our place in the natural world and do we have a place in it anymore?
We're going to show you a couple of quick examples of other uses of this Adam and Eve motif in our work. The first is a clip from a film we made in 2016 called The Kingdom of Shadows. And this is a feature-length film that we made when we were living in Portugal, which is our personal retelling of the myth of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and woven in with images from our dreams and family history. So it's a very sort of surrealistic, silent movie about the psychological knots that are carried forwards from the past and impact on the present. And the sequence we're going to show you is called The Marriage of Adam and Eve. So the film was shot over a long weekend in 2016, and we cast just all sorts of people that we'd kind of met and that we kind of gathered together, friends and friends of friends, all non-actors. The two that you saw there are dancers, amazing dancers that often work together, and we're very lucky that they kind of agreed to come in and perform as Adam as Eve. The film was made on a no budget, and it was very much this kind of film that we had to make. It was very much sort of delving into these kind of archetypal images and trying to sort of unravel them and rethink them in our own way. So this Adam and Eve kind of sort of story has been kind of coming up for us again and again. And at a certain point, what we kind of realized we were sort of interested in is this sort of moment in the Adam and Eve narrative where they come to that realization of what they've done, not in the moment of sin, but the moment after it, the moment as they're leaving the garden, when it kind of dawns on them that because of their actions, their whole reality has changed. And that kind of emotional and psychological kind of shift that happens in that moment as it dawns on them that they have set in motion something that they can't go back from. This is a part of a series called A&E by D&C. It's a series of 22 photographs. And for this, we had these prints of Adam and Eve onto which we threw red oil paint and then photographed them while the paint was still wet. So the original painting doesn't exist. All that exists is the photograph of this moment, this kind of unrepeatable, lost moment that's irretrievable. A&E obviously refers to Adam and Eve, but also to this idea of accident and emergency. This piece is called Imagine a Garden, and there's a series of 6 images that we made during our residency at High House. And these were created on the afternoons when it was raining so much that we simply couldn't go outside. And we decided to stay in the studio and create these pictures that were very much about this kind of desire to be somewhere else, to be out in the garden. And, you know, we were very much stuck in this white studio space with our scanner. These were all created on a digital scanner, with this kind of longing to kind of be in the garden and that kind of idea of being sort of behind a screen.
This picture is called The Edge of the Lawn. And this was the first picture that we made for the series. We spent the first couple of days of the residency just doing tests and looking for locations and walking around the gardens. And then we, by accident, found this chicken that was laying dead under the trees. And it was a gruesome thing to encounter. And it clearly had been dead for a couple of days and was covered in flies and wasps. And for us, chickens have a very personal association of home. So when we found this, we knew instantly that we needed to include it, and it kick-started our taking the photographs. And we also felt that there was something really interesting in taking this as a subject to think about our relationship to nature and animals. Chickens are, you know, as they exist now, they're very much a product of humans. The modern chicken is completely different, certainly, from its wild ancestors. And it's believed that chickens were domesticated around 8,000 years ago. So what we see in chickens now is thousands of years of breeding in order to create a human that is in total service, an animal that is in total service of human needs. But seeing it laying there on the edge of the lawn like that was in a way a confrontation with a wild aspect of nature, that process of death and decay that we are always striving to keep at bay. And also this was chicken very much not as packaged food, but as a corpse, a once living being that was now lifeless and a decaying body. And this also resonated for us with the lawn itself. And it's interesting to think of the lawn also as a form of domesticated nature, nature kind of redesigned to serve human activities and aesthetics. So the lawn as we know it today, this kind of flat sward of green that's kept tidy and pristine, this was something that kind of really began to take this form in the early 18th century alongside the reimagining of the country estates. The whole landscape in these estates was being redesigned to fit new ideals and visions of nature. So they were sculpted into parkland with the acres of rolling grass and picturesquely dotted with trees, as we kind of know them still today, creating this illusion of endless Arcadia, which was inspired by paintings, landscape paintings of people like Claude Lorraine and Poussin. And then a century later, the invention of the lawnmower kind of brought the possibility of the stream in a much smaller form into common households. And it's kind of spread all over the world since then. And essentially the lawns are these monocultures. They are, I think, only a couple of grass species that we have to keep in constant watch over and keep in shape and free from weeds. And if anything ever express this paradox of our desire to be, in nature, in tune with nature, and also our desire to control it, then certainly it's the lawn.
So, of course, we were also thinking about the history of still lives when we were looking at this chicken. Historically, still lives of dead animals will be the animals presented will be game or hunted animals or animals farmed for food. And they'll be shown on tabletops or in parlors. And they're often really used as an expression of showing wealth, showing abundance. But the history of still lives is a really fascinating genre to us. And for artists, I think it's often been a place where they can show their skill. It's, there's a lot of different textures and plays of light, which I think an artist can really sort of use to show off their virtuoso skills. These are two paintings that are here in the castle by Emily Stannard, which are really interesting pictures, worth a look. So after the photograph, we discovered also these pictures by Lucian Freud, which I think have a different kind of feeling to them, to the sort of historic still lives. I think what Freud seems to be doing here is closer to what we're doing in our picture, is really showing the bird as a dead body, as a corpse. And I think he's really here kind of expressing that kind of physicality of the body of death. And so we have another project that kind of relates to this that I want to briefly share, which is a series we've been working on also over the last year called Birds and Beasts of the British Countryside. And this is a series that really kind of grew again from our experiences of suddenly finding ourselves living in the countryside. And during our daily walks, we would often find dead animals laying in the path, laying by the side of the road, or sort of in the woods. And we always had this compulsion to photograph them. So whenever we would see them, we would, just on our phone, we would take these photographs of them. And we didn't really know what we were going to do with this. We didn't really know where this was going to take us. And so for a long time, we were just collecting these. And then last year, we decided to have a load of them printed in black and white as using a traditional chemical process. And then we hand painted them and with acrylic paint. So it felt like this was a way of adding a new kind of experience of looking at the image and thinking about a different experience of time and a different engagement with these pictures, that the pictures alone as a kind of digital image didn't seem to kind of express our feelings about being in the presence of these dead animal bodies, but somehow we could get to something closer through the process of painting. There's another one. It's a fox that we found laying sort of almost like it had just wandered over into this field and fallen asleep. So we realized that these pictures that we were making were also different to those historical depictions of still life. These are obviously not pictures which we're using to show a sense of abundance or wealth or power. These are just things that we've encountered. And in a way, we kind of think of these as almost like these quiet deaths, these undramatic kind of encounters of just stumbling across these bodies. And I think actually this is how it relates to the chicken. It's something that was just there, just laying there, something that we felt compelled to look at, we felt compelled to depict, that we could just have a moment to look at and think about what is this thing in front of us that we're looking at. And we hope that in some ways, the presence of these in the work can be a space for other people to think about those things too.
This picture is called Morning Disturbances. And all the pictures were taken with the camera on a tripod and using a timer. And the timer had 10 seconds. So this meant that we had 10 seconds to get from the camera into position. And often we would have one of us get into the position ready and the other one would set the timer and then run in. And when we came to make this picture, we decided to use the running in as a part of the action. And one of the things that added a kind of another difficulty to the making of the pictures was that we decided to have the characters with bare feet. And sometimes walking over the various different kinds of grounds that were in the estate, this made it quite uncomfortable. And but in a way, kind of all of this, all the tension of the 10 seconds, that physical discomfort, the cold sometimes, the race against the changing light, all of these things feed into what the picture has become. And I think, you know, in a way, so many factors have to come together for each picture. They all have to come together as well in that single moment, in reality, in front of the camera, and that is what you're getting. So this particular picture is one of the few that we got on the first take, and we didn't repeat it. And so amazingly, as the shutter opened, you know, I ended up in the right position between reeds. This dragonfly was still in place, and the pool had stopped and was reflecting like a mirror, and everything just came together.
So I'm going to talk about two paintings that were on our minds a lot through the making of this project. The first is this fantastic John Crome, which is at the Tate in London, Tate Britain. So you see this shows an area of common land that was at the time under threat of enclosures. In the foreground, you have this wonderful attention to the weeds and the earth and the kind of textures of the thistle and all the sort of muddy ground. And then, of course, the figures smaller in the middle ground, and then this great space beyond. And it's the foreground that really interests us. And I think from the way that Crome's painted it, I feel like that's what he was interested in too. He was very interested in the kind of what was going on in that kind of foreground area. And just a few rooms away from this in the Tate is this painting called Echo Lake by Peter Doig, which for us speaks really beautifully to the Crome. I love the attention that he gives to just the sort of damp atmosphere that's present here. Everything seems to be kind of dripping and full of moisture in some ways. And then there's this character that's screaming. And then at the same moment, it feels almost like the landscape is screaming. And this is a really big picture, and it really has to be seen. Both of them have to be seen in person, really. And we have this kind of new ritual that we've developed whenever we go to the Tate Britain. First of all, we go to the John Crome and we spend some time looking at that. And then we kind of shield our eyes and rush through to the Peter Doig. And then we spend some time staring at that. And it's sort of become this kind of thing that we do every time we go there. And so if anyone goes to the Tate Britain anytime soon, please look at these two pictures in a relationship together. And hopefully you'll find it as interesting as we do. Of what interests us about these two pictures is, of course, they're about figures in landscapes, and they're kind of speaking to us across time about the relationship of people to place. You know, one is very much rooted in this sort of reality of a person encountering a landscape that he loved under the threat of enclosures. And this one is more of an imagined landscape painted from a film still of a kind of film of a brutal murder that took place in this lake. And they're both kind of loaded with emotion, but in very different ways.
We'll have now a quick look at the other 6 pictures that are not included in the show. And I guess then we'll open up for questions, and we'll be happy to answer and hear any comments that you have. So this picture is called There It Was Before Them Life. And actually something that we haven't spoken about is the postures, which they also come from looking at painting and looking at cinema, and just gathering postures in our minds. This particular one with the hands on the hips came from a book of Stanley Spencer, a painting of Stanley Spencer that was in a book that we were looking at the residency. And he's someone that we also come back to a lot. And interesting that how it relates, even though we weren't necessarily thinking about it then, how he's also created this body of work deeply rooted in a specific place, and he creates these incredible biblical scenes, but sort of takes them into his own village and his own time, which is wonderful. We love him.
So this one's called "The Lawn Was the World." And this kind of motif of sleeping, falling, collapsing is something that we often return to as well.
This one's called Out in the Open. And all of the titles of the pictures were taken from Lion Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. This is one of our favorite books, and one that we can come back to again, and we've read several times. And we flicked through the pages and lifted interesting lines before we went on the residency. And then we would use them almost as narrative activators, kind of trying to match the lines with the locations and let them stir up the scenes.
This one's called "Making Gardens Out of Silence." We hadn't planned to do one with Flint, but then we realized actually being landscape that it's everywhere. You scratch the surface of the ground and it's like flint just seems to pour out. It's incredible. There was a lot of digging going on at the time in the estate as well, and they were pulling out these massive pieces of beautiful flint.
This one is called Life Stand Still. And this one is Beyond the Garden Gate.
And that's it.
That's it.
Thank you for listening.
I'm sure you agree that was incredibly fascinating, even for me to hear, and I feel like I knew your work quite well, but now I feel I have so much more insight. Thank you so much, both of you. I think what was so generous about that talk was that window into process and the way in which you construct your photographs, your work, and for you to share that with us today. Yeah, really appreciate that. But I suppose my kind of first kind of observation about the series is that there's, the space downstairs is fairly small. We had a kind of space in mind when we thought about the work. And there are 6 in total that you chose to show. Do you anticipate showing the 12 works as a body of work at a later date, or do you feel that those 6, that you put to one side, are just to one side at the moment?
I think if we could show them, we would like to. I think it's we knew we had that space and that we wouldn't be able to show all of them, but the work had a life of its own, and I think at a certain point we realized 12 was the number. It just, you don't know why these things happen, but it seemed 12 was the right number to make. I mean, it's a pretty loaded number for us, historically, I think biblically, also in how we organize our time, our year. But I think intuitively it just felt like that there needed to be this kind of quantity of them that was kind of the narrative opening up in different directions. So yeah, let's see. Hopefully there'll be opportunities to show the rest at some point.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, on your first images shot on the iPhone, did you use the iPhone's mic, or did you have an external source?
Both. So sometimes we'd have a little external mic, and sometimes it would just be the built-in one. But yeah, very windy on Mersey, so sometimes the built-in one.
I was wondering how you managed to cope with
Yeah.
And there's a question.
I just wanted to ask about the medium itself, the camera, because you're looking to capture immersive experiences with nature. And that when one thinks about the camera, you think, my God, that's rather a long way from what you want, in the sense that it's a non-human eye. It just takes what's in front of it, and it's a very sort of spectatorial medium rather than an immersive one. So, I mean, do you find yourself actually working against the camera a lot of the time? I mean, trying to flexibilize it as much as you possibly can?
I think that's a really great question, and we have a lot to say about it. I think the camera, is actually not very good at documenting and capturing reality, and this was something that I think we both experienced from very early, in our childhood, taking pictures with those kind of snapshot cameras or filming with high-8 cameras, like those home movie cameras that everybody kind of had in the 80s and 90s. And I think for some reason, both of us separately, having these experiences in childhood, being excited about looking at the world through the camera, it was something that kind of made us engage with experiences we were having. As a child, you kind of look at everything with excitement, and but at the same time, being very aware that how you're what you're seeing through the camera is different to what you see with your own eyes. But the camera does have this narrative around it as being a sort of mechanical, objective capturing of reality, which is, it certainly isn't. So that's really interesting. There's a tension there that I think has always been very productive for us, something that we always felt like we were working against. So I think the camera actually is an object that always reveals the human behind it, the way that each person will see something. They're making decisions about everything that is not within that image, in the same way that a painter makes those decisions. What is interesting is the painter, in a way, works from a blankness, and through gestures and abstractions moves towards the representation of something, even if it's not reality. It could be an inner reality. And someone that works with a camera starts with an image that springs immediately from reality, or produces something else that isn't reality. We always thought the camera was actually a tool for creating new realities. And recently we've been doing a lot of research into early photography and learning about how people saw early photographs, and discovering that people then were very aware of how photography wasn't like reality. There was all these distortions. Obviously, also the kinds of photographs that were produced then, they were black and white. The lenses had more distortion than lenses maybe have these days. So obviously, all those distortions made those things very visible to everyone. But because we've been using cameras so much and increasingly over the last 150 years, the camera has actually created a whole new world that we now take for reality, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And I think our work dances within that space and questions how does this image relate to reality?
Yeah.
Can I just make an observation? It probably doesn't make any sense at all, but you said the pictures have a life of their own, but a lot of the images here are to do with sort of non-movement, either in flying or death or something. They're not sort of capturing active moments, are they? And one or two of them are, I know, but it's just interesting what you said then. I said it, but it doesn't make any sense. I said it.
Do you want to comment on that? Or?
I think that's very interesting.
It
I
is,
think,
isn't it? Yeah, I was just kind of pondering it.
Well, with your fox and your chicken and your lying in the
Yeah.
grass and whatever, they're not movement things, are they?
But yeah, I suppose it's a moment of a frozen moment, which is, you know, often how the photograph is talked about.
It's not a movement that is frozen.
I see, yeah.
They are actually sort of still
Yeah.
life in themselves, aren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
I'm interested also in, you know, seeing, that's the first time I've seen the series, The Birds,
Birds and Beasts.
Yeah, exactly. And that introduction of paint at that point. I'm just kind of interested to hear a little bit more about the motivation for that, you know, given the kind of previous comment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've always, I mean, you know how much we're immersed in the history of painting and how much time we spend thinking about painting and that kind of language. And I think in some often we've felt like maybe we're painters, but we're kind of, you know, trapped in these kind of bodies that use cameras, which I think is like probably, you know, sort of what's interesting for us is that kind of tension of working with a kind of a medium when we're so in love with another media. But I guess it's always been sort of there on the back of our minds that we could paint the photographs at some point. You know, early films and early photographs were often hand-coloured, and we always loved how they looked. But it's just taken us a long time to get there. And I think part of it's, you know, confidence. You know, you go down a certain path working with certain materials, and you build up a language, and you kind of go deeper into it, and you know, you kind of get, it's not exactly about comfort zone because we're very good at breaking out of our own comfort zones, but I guess you just get on a certain path. And we've often, you know, since we first were working together, loved these lobby cards of these movies and always just thought, we're going to do some of those. And we've talked about it for years and years and years and years.
When you say lobby card, just to be super clear,
Yeah.
just because my knowledge of cinema is not as great as yours, for sure. Do you mean were they picked up in lobbies? So
they would take, you know, the black and white movies, they would take the still of the movie, someone would hand colour them to kind of make them look more exciting to get people to buy a ticket.
I'm with you now. Yeah.
But they're always slightly at odds with what the movie is as well, which is quite interesting. You know, sometimes the lobby card is more exciting than the movie, especially with those kind of, some of those B movies, you know, there'd be like monsters on the lobby card all painted in colours, and then you'd go and see the movie and it was like, you know, quite the opposite. So, but they're just kind of beautiful objects in themselves, and I guess it's also like the way that they're these sort of frozen cinematic moments, but they're just all that information just in that photograph, and they seem different to kind of like really the history of sort of photography and how sort of people have been thinking through the history of photography. It's like this other kind of sort of genre, almost like narrative painting or something. So they're just a really interesting kind of thing in themselves. But the painting, there's something exciting about taking a photograph and you know, essentially colouring it in that just brings a new life into it for us, and a different level of engagement. I think it's very easy to take a photo that's a single snapshot and has a certain sort of speed of being thrown away, but actually I think for us it's kind of also like changing what that photograph is.
It's a different reality.
Yeah, there's two levels of time present. There's the moment the thing has been captured, that single moment in time, but then there's another moment of time, which is the time it took to, you know, engage with it through the painting. And I think there's just something we're beginning to explore there, these two levels of experiencing and expressing time coming together. And so yeah, in some ways it's probably inevitable that at some point we would have paint would have kind of found its way in. And interestingly, the film that we showed the clip on, The Kingdom of Shadows, early on when we were planning that film, we had this fantasy of like printing every frame, painting it in black and white and hand colouring them.
Okay.
But we did a kind of quick estimation of the budget of what that would cost, and we realised it's absolutely impossible. It would take us sort of 10 years and but you know, one day maybe there'll be a film that we can make like that.
Maybe not a feature-length one.
Yeah, maybe. We might need some help.
Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions...
Could I just
Oh, yeah,
ask
of
you,
course.
to go back to the Lost Estate, how did you choose the 6 you've displayed?
I guess we had a couple that we knew for certain we wanted in, and from there it was what would create a balance and somehow represent the various zones of the, you know, of the narrative that's across the 12. Obviously there's certain things that aren't covered, like the flint wasn't in, which is something that was very close to being in, but I guess it was just a balance, a feeling of the balance. And I think we created I think kind of a short list of two sort of versions that we looked at, and then we'd also discussed it with Rosie and got her input. And yeah, I guess it's to a certain degree intuitive. Yeah, I don't know if you remember anything about that.
Yeah, there were definitely works that, you know, for example, the work with the chicken, you were very clear to me that was something that we would begin with, you know. But I remember, and I always forget the name of the plant, the purple...
the artichoke.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But that use of colour with the dress was just something really dynamic about that. So it was a kind of, it did feel quite a kind of intuitive process, I completely agree. Yeah, and I think the show itself, you have probably already seen it, but if you haven't, it's in the Common Project space downstairs, and it runs through 24, so lots of opportunity to return to it, but also to see it in relation to the Norwich School that you talked about so eloquently in your talk. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming today and for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you everyone.